Good evening and welcome to our first Bootham talk of the new academic year, our exciting bicentenary year. And I'm really pleased to say that we have Roger Camrass joining us this evening, and he's going to be talking about Back to the Future, a radical manifesto for a digital world. Roger is an old scholar. And he is an internet pioneer. And when he was at Bootham, he was the first person to actually make his own computer, which was in 1967, so really quite early. He made that in the labs at Bootham. After Bootham, he went on to Cambridge to study natural sciences, but then to MIT, where he studied electrical science and business as combination. And whilst at MIT, was involved in the design of the internet. And from there, he's really been a pioneer of IP networks and the digital networking and digital economy. And that's what he's going to be talking about with us today. He has worked with some of the largest companies in the world. He's worked with governments, and he is currently a visiting professor at the University of Surrey, and also the founder in the UK of CIONet, which is an pan-European organisation which brings together chief IT officers so that they can share expertise and knowledge. So we're really excited that Roger's going to be talking to us today. He's very well informed on his subject. So I will introduce Roger.
Thank you so much, Elaine. It's a real delight to talk to Bootham boys and girls today, and I welcome the opportunity to take you all into the future. But firstly, it would be disrespectful to discuss the future without mentioning the passing of the Queen Elizabeth II, because she has been such an influential and positively influential person on the global stage for over 70 years. And as a person, I think she demonstrates so many of the qualities of leadership that I think we all aspire to. And she sets the bar. For the younger generation, there really is no one that one would wish to look up to other than herself, for all the accomplishments, for all the hard work, and particularly given that many of you will be working once you leave school and university for at least 70 years. I think we all wish to follow in her wonderful footsteps. So let me get back to the future and give you a perspective on what the future might look like, but particularly what opportunities does it present to you as students? I think there's never been a better time for career development, particularly in the computing digital world. And the community that I look after in Europe, we have 12,000 digital leaders. Every one of them recognizes this is the time, this is the moment in time to get serious about digital. So just to give you an illustration of how far we have come from the past, I had a birthday recently, and after the birthday, I'd received a singing greetings card from one of my friends, and I casually tossed it in the waste paper basket. What I'd just done was disposed of the total world computing power in 1950. So that would come as a little bit of a surprise, I'm sure, to many of you. And just this weekend, I read the copy of the Sunday Times, as I always do. I was exposed to more information in that single newspaper than people were exposed to during their whole lives in the 17th century. How far have we come? But equally, how far are we going to go? And Alvin Toffler, who was the great futurist of the last century, said in his book Future Shock in 1970, "I detect change in the rate of change." So that is a profound statement of just how fast we're traveling today, and we're traveling fast into the future. and you all have a wonderful opportunity to join the train, to get on board, and to really reap the benefits of the world that's going to come. But before I talk about the future, let's actually think a little bit about the past. I think there have been three defining events over the last 500 years or so that have really set us on course for the next 500 years. So let me just take those three events. The first one is the European Renaissance. I'm sure and I hope that some of you are familiar with it. It was an extraordinary time when suddenly books were published and distributed to the general public. Up till that time, there was only the Bible. And if you were even found with a Bible in your house, you could be executed. Clearly, the church had a complete stranglehold over its populations in Europe. Now, the catalyst for this revolution was the printing press, the Gutenberg printing press. And within 17 years, it had accelerated its development right across Europe and started to produce libraries of books that every individual could read. And of course, that gave rise to the great thinkers. It gave rise to science, to sociology, to a whole range of new disciplines. And of course, it did have an impact on the church. The power of the church diminished dramatically, as we've certainly noticed in this last century. So that's the European Renaissance 500 years ago. Without it, we may not be in the situation that we're in today. The second big revolution was, of course, the industrial age, the industrial revolution around about 1800. And that enabled goods to be mass produced. The UK was the leader, actually, in the early days of the Industrial Revolution. Much of the world's goods were actually manufactured in Manchester, in Leicester, in Leeds, where factories were built and mass production was adopted. And of course, what that's done over the last 200 years is to give us a much more materially rich environment in which to live. And I think all of us recognize we have lots of cool stuff today. Almost everyone has cool stuff. And even the poorest people in society have their washing up machines, they have their cars, they have their television sets. We all have access to stuff. But what's now interesting is the birth of the digital world. And I would like to say that when I left school in 1968, something was happening in California. It was the founding of a company called Intel. And Intel produced the first microprocessors back in 1968. Of course, today we take that for granted. There are billions, if not trillions, of microprocessors around the world. But rather like the printing press, the microprocessor was the catalyst for massive change. And of course, without the microprocessor, the internet would never have been built. And when I was at MIT in the mid-70s, computing still was relatively early stage, but we had enough to be able to develop and design big networks. So those are the three things that have really had impact over a 500-year period. And what I think is particularly important for you all to recognize, we're just at the beginning of the next 500 years, whereas the European Renaissance really took 500 years to work its way through to the modern era. I believe that the digital era will last at least 500 years, probably dating back to the birth of the microprocessor, rather like the birth of Christ in 1968. So I was very fortunate, I must admit, to leave school at the right time. I didn't understand quite how significant that would be. There didn't seem to be the opportunities in those days for people in electrical science. There were no computer science courses at universities, and people typically took maths or physics. I took physics to get into the computer world. Now let's step into that magical digital world. And to understand how profoundly different it is, I'd like to just take 5 different elements that have all converged together in time to create a tsunami of change, almost comparable to the European Renaissance. And I'll go through those, but they are about technology, they're about information, they're about economics, the social agenda, and policy, what we call the Pest Framework. Now, at any one time, one of these elements might change. Politics might change, technology might change, economics might change. But when they all change at once, perhaps that is a 500-year occurrence. So be prepared. We're moving into a very different era. All of these will have massive impact. So let me take each one in turn. First, of course, is technology. And even at my tender age of 18, I recognized that technology would connect the world. At that time, using a telephone was something that you had out in the hall. We had no mobiles. You can't even imagine how primitive life was, even for relatively affluent families. But today, of course, everything is connected. And working into the future, we'll have smart homes controllable anywhere from our apps. We'll have smart cities, autonomous cars, and much more. But what's really interesting, human beings will have to learn to live and work with software robots. Within 20 years, we can expect that around 50% of the workforce will be replaced by software. It's inevitable. If you just go into a factory today, you'll see robots everywhere. You'll see perhaps one or two human beings having coffee in an office there just to ensure that the robots don't break down. That's not true in the office today. If you go into big offices, certainly before COVID, you'd see hundreds of people behind computer screens, and you had to ask yourself, what are they doing? And the answer is they were doing highly repetitive manual work, all of which could be done by a computer. So I think in that respect, technology is going to change the way we work, and it certainly will change the way we live. But add to that the developments in biotechnology. One famous futurist has recently said, death will become a soluble problem. Expect to live for 500 years. Now, again, that's not going to happen in my lifetime, sadly, or perhaps that's a good thing. But I think in your lifetimes, biotechnology will essentially arrest aging. It will give us the spare parts to refurbish our bodies. All of these things are going to be happening in the next 20 to 30 years. So that's technology, certainly on the move. The next thing, which is really important, is information. And it's all about our personal information, our personal data, which even today is being captured, chronicled, catalogued, stored, recalled, and sold. What we call the new era of hyper-personalization compared to the era of hyper-connectivity. Now, who owns and protects our data will be the biggest issue in the coming decades. Today, who owns our data? Apple, Google, Facebook, Instagram. Do they have the right to own our data? Do they have the right to sell our data, largely without our knowledge or permission? Just watch how many adverts appear on your screens when you're in social media. All of that's paid for. They are using your data and essentially monetizing your data. The third area is economics. So in the last 200 years, we valued our stuff. We paid big money for our homes, our cars, our technologies. But in the coming future, the big money, the big value will be in our personal data. That data will generate insights into what we personally need as individuals, whether it's our health and well-being or it's our education and careers. Understanding that data, giving insight, deriving insight from that data is going to be the key to the new economics. In the words of the person, Frederick W. Smith, who founded the FedEx organization, in 1970, he said, information about a parcel will be worth more than the parcel itself. And I would put it to you that information about an individual like you or I will actually be worth more than everything that we buy. It's giving insight to the people who actually supply us with the products and services that we need. So this is, again, a profound revolution. The fourth is the social agenda. So I've talked a lot about stuff, really good stuff. We love our stuff. But guess what? Through virtual reality and increasingly through the metaverse, we're going to inhabit two realities at the same time. Our physical reality, where stuff is important, but more important, our virtual reality. It's the virtual world that will become more and more of the center of our lives. And that world will be populated by NFTs, non-fungible tokens, cyber cryptocurrencies, and everything else you can imagine. It will be essentially the new source of value, which will have no materialistic aspects to it. It will essentially be all about our experiences. And I should say, the world of tomorrow, the digital world, will be less and less about our stuff and more about our experiences. And to coin another great phrase from a former colleague, a futurist, his view was tomorrow is all about to go, to be, to do, and to know. And of course, Nike coined the word to do and to go, to be, very early on. Those will be the drivers in our lives tomorrow, very different to the drivers of today. Last but not least, policy and politics. So we're all aware today of the cultural wars which are escalating as autocracies like China and Russia are facing off against Western democracies. Not only is that happening, but we've also got increasing polarization between the left and the right, which will intensify within democracies themselves, but hopefully will not destroy those democracies. US, for example, is dangerously close to implosion. The left and right polarization has now reached extremes, which we certainly hope to escape in this country. And then there is the debate about wealth inequality. I believe the first trillionaire has already been born, probably at school, probably going to university in a few years' time. Elon Musk is already worth 200 billion. How do we put that in context when so many people in the world are poor? And I believe that 50 people in the world are worth as much as half the global population of 7 billion people. How do we reconcile that with the world that we want to live with in the future? So I hope you will recognize the future is going to be different. The next 500 years is going to be very different. But of course, we all have to take a first step forward. It's not going to all arrive tomorrow, although I will point out that the point of singularity, when the combined intelligence of compute power in the world will exceed the combined intelligence of humanity, is forecast to take place in 2046. That's just 24 years away. Just think about that. So I painted a picture of the world tomorrow. What does it mean for you? If you're still at school, if you're going to university, what opportunities does this open up for you? I've emphasized the words hyper-connected, hyper-personalized. And what I believe is that we are going to return to village life. Now that sounds ridiculous, doesn't it really? We escaped village life at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. But I think village life will be different. It will be digital villages. not physical villages. And already we see companies set up to take over high-rise office buildings and convert them into multi-purpose living. Young people particularly will come together, they will live, socialize, and work in the same buildings. And as some of you will know, WeWorks has revolutionized office space. It's all about sharing. The founder of WeWorks has just launched a company called The Flow. That company will design living and workspace for new generations, many of whom will not wish to afford to buy homes and have all the responsibilities of running their homes. They really don't need to in the modern age. This will be a very attractive alternative. So that will be the village, the electronic village of the next century, or the coming decades. And where in village life yesteryear, we had the crafts and the guilds that held the villages together, the goldsmith, the various different crafts that people took up. I think that we'll have similar sets of crafts in the digital village, but of course they will be different. So let me just give you 4 possible crafts, essentially careers that you may wish to follow. And by the way, I think the first trillionaire will work on his or her own. You won't need to have a big company to make your first trillion. You can do it all from your digital village. So the first actor in my digital village is the Hollywood producer, or what I call the digital artisan. Because as automation displaces all our jobs today, what will be left? It's all about creative skills. It's not about repetitive work, which is essentially mind destroying. And that creative work will be focused on creating new experiences, though that will be the area where humanity will pay the bigger premiums. So Hollywood producer, starting point. The next one I call the hyperscaler. So people who come up with relevant ideas, such as the Hollywood producer, will need to expand those ideas in space to cover the world, cover global markets. They'll need people who can actually incubate the idea and adopt it using the big utilities and platforms that I'll describe to you to give them scale. It was really interesting when Instagram and WhatsApp were bought over by Microsoft. I think WhatsApp was 3 years old, employed 30 people, and was bought for $19 billion. That just gives you an idea of what I mean by hyperscale. Then I think the third area is what I call the archiver, because I've been talking a lot about people's personal data and collective data pertaining to communities. And the archiver will be a person who's skilled in chronicling our personal and collective data to ensure that we have the necessary privacy and that we gain fair value exchange for our data. Essentially, they'll be the new bankers, but they will be banking data, not money. And last but not least, what I call the platform operator, because in this digital world, we're still talking about scale. Why did WhatsApp command such a premium? Because it already had hundreds of millions of people subscribing to it. And so there will be people who will have to run the platforms and utilities that will support all these microcosms of creativity. And those platforms will encompass all the functions, all the skills that we know today, such as information technology, HR, finance, CRM, etc. We won't need to, as entrepreneurs, as Hollywood producers, have to reproduce those. They will be there. We can plug in and we can take advantage of those massive platforms that will occupy the world. And if you don't believe me, go and look at Amazon's cloud platform, AWS, or Microsoft's platform, Azure cloud platform. These are the new factories of tomorrow. They are vast industrial complexes that reach right across the world. And there will be room for those, as well as the little entrepreneurs in the villages. These will be essential tools to create economy of scale and scope and produce the first trillionaire. So you may be thinking, well, oh my gosh, there's so much here, so much choice. How do I sort of set my own direction? How do I set sail into the new digital world? And I think today we all have far too much choice, career choice. I have 3 grown-up boys. They all have found it difficult to find the right career. Fortunately, they've all done so, but it didn't happen in days or weeks. It took many years. And it was interesting, when I left Cambridge, my senior tutor said to me, Roger, you'd have a wonderful career in the civil service. Well, I can assure him that would not have been the place for me. I'm much more entrepreneurial. So we've got to really recognize who we are. What are our ingredients for success? So let me actually help you influence your choice. The first thing, when I talk to digital leaders across Europe, and I've talked to many of them, the first thing they say to young people is follow your passion. There's no obstacles to success if you believe in your purpose. Now, that was not always true historically, but I think it's absolutely true today. All of those people followed their passion. All of those people have been extremely successful. The second thing, which is really important, be ambitious, set ambitious goals, because the rewards for success have never been greater. And I don't just mean money. Look at people like Sir David Attenborough, a person who has a stature equivalent to the Queen. He wasn't in the business of making lots of money. He's not Elon Musk. He was in the business of being creative, of really influencing the world to a better place. So be ambitious, because I can assure you there's no reward for mediocrity. There's no middle way anymore. You either make it or you don't. And one digital leader said to me when I said, what's your greatest fear in life? He said, to be irrelevant. The third area, I think, which is so important for young people, tackle the big issues, because the next 50 years are going to be testing like never before. We've got to tackle big problems like climate change, pandemics, energy, and much more. They are the very big problems. So be ambitious. Set your sights on helping the world to solve those problems. Interestingly, Musk has been brought in to try and solve our world energy problems. And remember that Bill Gates of Microsoft has actually cured polio in this world. It's all possible. I think last but not least, and this is really important for all of you, adopt humility. Because I think only by bringing others with you can you achieve your ambitious goals. Humility, integrity, and respect for others will help multiply your effects and rewards, be they financial, intellectual, social, or indeed spiritual. And finally, I would hope that many of you at Bootham will consider yourselves in the years to come as leaders in the professions, leaders in industry, leaders in government, wherever you wish to go. It is about leadership. And I have been very fortunate over the last few decades to meet many different leaders across Europe, across the US. And I've noticed that there are really 5 ingredients to leadership. Let me just share those with you. The first one is purpose. Having a clear sense of vision about your family, about your work, about society is critically important. Without that vision, life is confusing and probably not very productive. Be authentic. Always display integrity and humility to inspire others and to encourage them to greater heights. Again, many of the digital leaders have said to me, our real happiness in life is to see others succeed, others to learn from our mistakes. Third area is curiosity, constantly create new ideas, because that's what the new world is about. It's not about mundane, repetitive tasks. It's all about creativity. Fourth area is be imaginative, and particularly open-minded to diverse cultures and points of view. Diversity is a big topic today. In the street where I live in London, we have 45 homes, 13 different nationalities. We are a very diverse society today. And last but not least, dynamic. We are entering unknown territory. The world has never been more uncertain. We have to respond rapidly to changing circumstances. So that's really what I'd like to say to you, but I will note that Queen Elizabeth possessed all these qualities as a global leader. She was deeply religious. She was a fundamentally authentic person. She showed consistency of purpose and curiosity. And as head of state, she's both been imaginative and dynamic. And I think it's important for all of you in your own lives to look for those inspiring leaders that you wish to emulate. Because mentors, in my own personal experience, have been of unmeasurable value. I've had mentors throughout my career, through my work, and beyond that. They've inspired me to do more, to do better. And I've worked for 50 or more years already. I really give myself another 20, then I will be in the realms of the Queen and David Attenborough. I'm inspired by people, and they inspire me to continue to work. And I finish with the immortal words of Yoda: do or not, or do not, there is no try, and pass on what you've learnt to others. I thank you very much for your attention. I hope it's been interesting. I would obviously welcome follow-up and happy to share some of the notes and publications that I've achieved over time. But thank you, Elaine, for this opportunity.
Thank you, Roger. That was really interesting. Now, people are being a little bit shy about asking questions. Mike Shaw has a question for you. He says that William Gibson said, "The future is already here." So it just isn't very well distributed. Yes. So how do we redistribute the future?
I love that saying. It's so true. What I've found actually in my own experience, and I've spent all my life applying technology in government, in business, and elsewhere, it takes 20 years from seeing the opportunities, seeing the possibilities, to actually realizing them. So guess what? In the 90s, much of what I've said to you today, I was already writing about. I wrote a speech in the late 90s, which told us pretty much everything that you've heard today. But guess what? In the late 90s, it was not happening. And as we went into year 2000, we all got very excited about the dot-com boom, e-commerce, Amazon, Google, etc. It took 20 years for those companies really to gain the scale of other traditional companies like Procter & Gamble or Unilever. So it takes a lot longer than we imagine, although we know what's coming next. And just to whet your appetites, the last 20 years in technical terms have been about cloud, mobile communication, social media, and data. Those have been the four main technology developments in the last 20 years. I call that wave one. And we've had much of what we're going to get out of them. Wave two is already here. What is wave two? It's artificial intelligence, machine learning, machine vision, 3D printing, and I could go on, Internet of Things, drones, robots, etc. I think there's more in wave two than there was in wave one. If you look at artificial intelligence, for example, I mentioned that computers will be more intelligent than human beings by 2046. And by the way, there's a university called Singularity University in California. You should go and study there, because that's all about what happens when the point of singularity is reached. But those technologies like AI are still highly embryonic. They won't really mature for another 10 years. And then we've got quantum computing. Quantum computing, in my view, will be able to emulate the whole process of evolution, start to finish. It will have the power to emulate just about anything that human beings' experience represents. So we're heading into a vastly new area of technology. We know what it is, but we don't know what it's going to do for us.
Actually, I have a question for you. Part of your wide CV has been advising governments. And I wonder what kind of advice you would give to a government about how it can plan for that change in the requirements of the workforce. So, you know, so many people still are employed in offices doing repetitive tasks, and within a few years those jobs are going to disappear, but governments have to have some policy to help provide work for those people who are going to be displaced by technology. So what would you be advising a government?
It's a really tough question, and actually quite recently Oxford University published a big report on employment prospects, and they, at that time, I think it's about 5 years ago, identified 10 million jobs in this country which would go. But despite all that, we're still at full employment. So it's not going to happen overnight. The biggest question, of course, is education. So someone who's been sitting in a factory assembly line is hardly going to be my Hollywood producer. And that's going to take a big change. I don't think universities in this country understand what's coming. They really are set in their own industrial world, just teaching old, out-of-fashion ideas that really have little place in the next 20, 30 years. Interestingly, Blair's son has developed a company called The Multiverse, which I actually think is a very clever approach to education, which says don't go to university, don't sit on a seat in a lecture theatre all your time for 3 years. Go out and learn through doing. And I think that actually getting that hands-on experience is going to be massively important. Now, can government really break the lock of the universities? Difficult to say. I think they will actually become irrelevant because online learning and experience-based learning are just going to overtake them. And I know a number of digital leaders in universities today who are knocking on the door of the Vice Chancellor and saying, your model is broken, got to repair yourself or reinvent. And I think, like many parts of government, this is a tough, hard message. And by the way, I certainly know a lot about government and the difficulties they have in adjusting, much more so than private sector, because they don't actually have to survive. In the private sector, if you don't adjust, if you don't evolve, you die. It's a simple evolutionary process. Government is not like that. If you don't adapt and evolve, you're a zombie, but you stay alive. And so I think we again have a big problem as more and more people are going to work in government. I would fundamentally discourage that. I think the government is not a place, sadly, where you're going to be able to realize your dreams. And a lot of people go into government, I've met so many of them at graduate level, thinking, oh, we're going to be able to serve society. Isn't that wonderful? We're going to do good for society. 10 years later, utter and complete frustration. oh my God, we can't do anything useful. The bureaucracy has fallen on our heads. And then, interestingly, the chair of my first company that I worked for came out of Oxford, brilliant man, a very big socialist, went to work for the National Health Service and went to his boss after a few months being in the service to say, I think we could do something really radical here. We can make great efficiencies, we can improve patient care. And he rolled out a whole list of initiatives. His boss looked at him vacantly and said, don't even think about it. We are going to change. And guess what? He left, formed his own company, and did extremely well. Built a great company, and I was lucky to serve under him. So I'm fundamentally disillusioned, sadly, by what government in the civil service stands for. I just don't think, apart from small areas, that they add any value. They could add value in policy, and they do, but in the day-to-day running of the country, no chance.
Okay, we have a question from Howard Smith. The risk to highly skilled but programmable roles is a serious challenge, and not everyone can be a creative. There will probably be roles we can't imagine. Will they pay enough, or will inequality widen?
Yes. Now, again, it's a really interesting question of where will the money come from in the future? And one of the things that I'm sure you know better than I do, when you follow forums on the internet and you see the amount of exchange that takes place, it's absolutely fascinating. I have a personal trainer, and in his spare time, he reconditions 1950s hi-fi equipment. He finds old equipment which is completely out of date, doesn't work, but has a wonderful brand and lineage. He replaces all the components, makes it look absolutely modern and beautiful, sells it for a lot of money. Now, what's his skill? Well, he's really, he's a physical trainer, but he's actually quite a good electrician. But he listens to the forums, he gets involved, he learns from the forums. He's in touch with hundreds of people all over the world who are doing exactly what he does, and he learns. So I think that most people, you'd be surprised, are genuinely more creative than you imagine. I've worked in big factories, and I've seen how frustrated people are because they cannot use their creativity. And I think tomorrow's world will give us so much more opportunity to build and develop our creativity in ways, as I say, which we can't imagine today. So don't despair. There's plenty of opportunity in that creative space. And I don't just mean media. That's overcrowded. I think there's opportunity in so many other different spaces that society needs. Healthcare, for example, that's a massive area of creativity today, solving health issues. Large numbers of people are going into that industry because it's vital for our survival.
Okay, this is an interesting question from Text Mining. How will life be in the future if COVID were a computer virus rather than a human virus?
Very, very good question. You have no idea probably how many viruses there are in the world today attacking our computer systems. How big the impact has been and will be. Almost shutting down the NHS at one point. Viruses go back probably 20 years or so. I think I can remember the first virus that hit the computer world, and it's escalated dramatically. And now Russia, China, North Korea, Iran spend billions inventing viruses to destroy the Western world. They want to shut down our telecom networks, our energy power stations, hospitals. Don't ask me why, but that's what they want to do. But what's really interesting is self-generated viruses. So as I mentioned, computers are becoming a lot more intelligent. It's not just about people who create the viruses, because they do, but it's what happens when computers create the viruses. Now, to give you an example of how clever computers can be, the first computer to beat the world chess master must have been about 10, 15 years ago. It's possible in chess to document every move that is possible. It's finite. Go is a Chinese game which is almost impossible to document because there's a near infinite number of variations. An artificial intelligence program has broken that. It's beaten the world master in Go. Now, that is not about just replicating clever moves that you've learned from a store. It's actually about being highly intelligent and adapting and responding all the time, building your strategies, testing your strategies, and competing with human beings. That's a different game altogether. So I think I agree with you. We're going to have to work very hard to control viruses. Quantum computing will actually help us to defend ourselves against these viruses, but equally, it will actually give those rogue states and hardened criminals an opportunity to create even more pernicious viruses. So it's a standoff, unfortunately, but it's a massive industry. And again, if you're looking for a good job, go into cybersecurity. It's only going to get bigger and better. So it's a vast opportunity, unlimited, really.
Okay, we have another question from Mike Shaw.
That's good.
Is there a danger that virtual realities might proliferate so that people can live in enclosed consensual realities that aren't connected to others?
Yes, again, that's a really great question. I mean, imagine the social impact if metaverse really gets going. We all talk about couch potatoes, people who sit and watch television 8 or 9 hours a day, and that's not unusual. And today, people are on the internet 8 to 9 hours a day. What happens if you put on your goggles or whatever terminals will emerge in the future, and you are living and sitting in virtual reality for much of your day? I sometimes joke that I'm looking forward to the days of retirement when I can just hang out in the beaches of Florida and California, and I'm sure that will happen. But will I want to return to a cold winter in London? I'm not sure. So it does present some really big challenges. I think is that virtual reality something that can comfortably coexist with our human realities, our physical realities? I think time is going to tell. But believe me, there's a lot of effort, money, and time going into the metaverse and all the associated technologies. What it will take, and it's really interesting, in 97, I was actually asked to look at applications for data over a mobile phone. And you might ask, why? Why was I asked to do that? Well, that was the first time that we could actually transmit data over a mobile phone. And it was not obvious how we were going to use the phone. And I went out and I talked to a lot of people, and I came up with a couple of ideas. And one was called Personal World. And I said, in the future, we'll be able to stream our digital media, our films, our photographs, our videos to our phone. Never been done before. A second one, I said, we will be able to capture and correspond events and meaningful situations like a football match or a christening or a parliamentary debate. We'll be able to do all of those things through our phone. And thirdly, we can work anywhere we want, anywhere, anytime. That was in 97. It took 10 years before the iPhone appeared. And the iPhone actually brought all of those things to us. It brought Facebook to us, Instagram to us, and all those other good things. It changed the world. And I think we're waiting probably for some sort of an iPhone style development, which will immerse us really into that meta world that we're technologically able to create.
Thank you. We have another question here from Gail Murden. You sound very optimistic about the future.
Yeah.
Do you have any fears about how this bright and shiny new world might not be for the greater good?
Yes, Gail, I have a lot of fears. When I look at the overpopulation, when I was born in 1950, there were 2 billion people in the world. Today there are 7, likely to be 10 within another 10 years. How do we feed them? I look at climate change. Climate change could be dramatic. It could force over 1 billion people to migrate. Where are they going to come to? London? Probably not, but it's all possible. There's going to be a massive migration of people because conditions will be insufferable around the world. Energy, I mean, we have just become too reliant on abundant energy, and abundant energy doesn't really exist. We've got to cut our cloth. We've got to reduce our energy consumption, particularly with a population of 10 billion. So yes, of course, I'm fearful. I'm particularly fearful for my kids who are in their 30s and 40s. How are they going to cope in the next 50 years? But I'm also optimistic. I do think that ultimately the human race actually can confront these big problems, these big issues. They can really control them. They can fundamentally make the difference. And it's up to you. It's not my generation who's going to do that. We've had our time. It's your generation who have to, as I said in my speech, head for the big challenges, head for the big problems. And it's very interesting when I talk to people who are hiring students from universities into companies, consultancies, etc. People in those companies, these young people are asking some very serious questions to the companies that they're applying to. They're asking them, what is their sense of social responsibility? What is their purpose? Are they making their own efforts to confront some of these world problems? And I have to tell you, quite cynically, they're not, in most cases, yet really woken up to the issues, for example, of sustainability. It's talked about, but people aren't acting. So I think the world has got to get much more engaged, much more serious about these big problems. And I do think it's the young people, it's your generation who are going to make that happen. But you've got to shout, you've got to make impact. The world ultimately is yours. You're going to inherit it. You've got to make sure that the conditions are appropriate for your own life and well-being.
Talking about advice to young people, and we were talking about going back to the future, so kind of going back for you, is there something that you would have advised, knowing what you know now, what would you have advised young Roger when he was about to leave Bootham in 1968?
Well, actually, my father said to me, join the British Post Office. It's a job for life. How wrong he was. Wrong in the sense that it's not a job for life at all, and wrong because it would have been, the antithesis of who I am. I've worked for 10 different organizations in my life. Half of them have been startups, young companies, half have been big global companies like Fujitsu, like Ernst & Young. So I've had a very varied experience. And I remember I actually was interviewed to be partner at Ernst & Young, and the board actually said to me, do you think you've had a successful career so far? And I said, actually, I've rolled the dice. Sometimes I've had a 6 and sometimes I've had a 1. But fortunately, in general, I've been lucky. Perhaps I've been wise as well, but I've been lucky, and I'd do the same again. And I think that people today have got to be flexible. They've got to be adaptable. You can't stay in the same place for 50 years. That's not going to happen. You've got to look at opportunities as learning experiences, get the most out of each opportunity. Don't rush, but take your time. extract the best value, the best learning, and move on. And certainly be prepared to change your career many times. I mean, if anyone had said to me, would I be leading a community of 12,000 digital leaders in Europe when I left school? There weren't such things. You just have to adapt to situations. So be adaptable. Always be conscious of what's going on. Always be looking out for opportunity. You'll find opportunity if you look for it. There's plenty about. So don't dig yourself into a hole. Be flexible, adaptable, and always ambitious. As I've said before, ambition, once it's well focused, is everything.
Wonderful. Thank you. I think that does seem to be a good place to stop. I think we've had all of our questions. I think we've answered all the questions. There's some really interesting questions. Thank you so much, Roger. That was such an interesting talk. And I was particularly struck about the really good advice that you gave to young people who are probably at school or at university, about sort of giving some guidance as to what they should be thinking about when they're choosing to do things in the future. I feel quite reassured in some ways that actually people are thinking about these issues, and they're thinking about them from very different angles. It's not just about politicians, that people who are coming from the IT sector and industry are also thinking about these big issues that we all need to tackle. And I think you've given us some really good advice as to things that we perhaps all can do. Also particularly struck with what you had to say about the re-engineering, I think we'll use, the education system. That's certainly something that, as part of our bicentenary, we will be looking at questions about where we think the education system of the future should be going. So that was actually a good lead into that. So thank you so much. I have had one last question from someone here, is from someone who missed a lot of the talk. It's fine, you can catch up. We've recorded this talk and it will be on the Bootham YouTube channel, so you can watch it tomorrow, and you can watch it as many, there we go, we've put up the link for you. Watch it as many times as you want. I'm sure it's something that people will go back to. It's a really good resource. Thank you so much, Roger.
Pleasure. Really nice to talk with you. And I really do hope that the Bootham boys take full advantage of what the world has to offer in the future. I'm sure they will. I really like the style of education that I received personally at Bootham. It was very liberating, very creative, and it's really stood me in good stead. And
I'm very proud to say, since Roger's Day, we've moved from boys to co-ed, and so Bootham boys and girls will definitely have learned what you had to say. Thank you so much, Roger. We will be continuing our programme of talks into the autumn term, and I'll be publishing the next programme in a couple of weeks. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I've enjoyed it. I hope you have too. Thank you.